Hey Larry, how's it going?
It's good, man. This is a good way to distract ourselves on the eve of the election here.
That's
That's good to
that's
see
what
you.
I'm trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do. I think no matter the outcome, things are going to be really interesting come Wednesday. By this weekend, I think this country is going to be in a frenzy, no matter what way it goes.
Well, probably like you, I'm hoping for a landslide either way. I just hope we have a clear victor and that somehow we can find a way to unite on Wednesday or soon behind whoever wins.
Yeah, yeah. I I hope that's going to be the case as well. How's your family doing?
Buddy, things are good. Yeah. Man, we've got three kids left at home. Our oldest lives here in Eagle River, and she's thriving as a business owner now, and it's nice having her close. And then Calvin, as you know, is training for the Iditarod. So I think my oldest have they're doing well adulting. So it's fun to see that.
That's great. That's great. And I want to say thank you again for opening up your home. You guys definitely showing that courtesy and the hospitality was awesome. I brought six smelly dudes into your house and you and I was like, guys, just try not to sweat on anything.
Oh man, it's so cool what you guys did with the Seppala house up there in Nome, and man, that was like the smallest contribution ever. So I was glad we could be in a position to do that.
We would have loved to have had you up, but it was really it sure beat sleeping in the Anchorage airport for the night. So uh, we're really grateful for that. I'm just going to give for our listeners a little bit of a rundown of who you are, so that you don't have to brag on yourself. And then we're just going to take off. I've got some questions for you, but just want to talk to you about your life. For those who don't know, Larry Daugherty is he's a medical doctor focused in cancer research and cancer care, and he's an outdoor adventurer. But when you dive deeper, there's a lot more to his story than that. He worked his way through medical school as a firefighter and a paramedic. He's also he served as assistant professor at the Mayo Clinic for a while, and now he divides his time between medical care and his entrepreneurial endeavors, doing a lot with real estate and also coaching other medical doctors into the fields of real estate and how they can invest their money and do those kinds of things. And
I appreciate that, brother. Thank you so much for the kind introduction.
is the real is the you're running a podcast with this too, aren't you? With your
Um,
with your
Not my own podcast. I do have a small YouTube channel that I don't pay a ton of attention to. I probably need to do more there, but I put out some free content on YouTube, just little trips and tips and hacks for how to invest in multifamily real estate. But primarily, I coach. I run a small coaching program where I teach other physicians how to attain financial freedom through real estate. And really, my heart there, Jonathan, is that. My own journey in medicine kind of went topsy turvy during COVID. I was part of a medical practice that went bankrupt.
okay.
And, treating cancer patients, I'm a radiation oncologist. And so cancer patients are under treatment for sometimes 8, 9, 10 weeks every single day, coming in for daily radiation treatments. So even though my practice went bankrupt, I still had patients that were getting treatment for months, and it's not a type of a treatment that you can easily transfer to another clinic.
Mhm.
So I was in a position where I actually needed to continue to come to work, even though I wasn't getting a paycheck. It was just the right thing to do. And it was initially very distressing on multiple levels.
Oh
But
yeah.
something happened to my heart inside where I had to really change my heart and my mind, that I was showing up in the middle of a pandemic when my country needed me, when the world needed me. And that instead of practicing medicine for a paycheck, I was, doing my community service. And I realized that that's actually the way that I always wanted to see medicine again, that I never wanted to rely on medicine as a paycheck or trade time for money in that way. And so that's really what lit my real estate journey on fire, is that I wanted to have a stream of income that would allow me to just consider medicine my charitable impact to humanity. And I feel like that's the purest way to practice medicine. And so That's also the reason why I run this coaching program is I feel if I can help other physicians not be financially tied to medicine, that it will kind of change their heart in the way that they're able to practice medicine.
That's fantastic. And I know you have a strong religious background like I do, and I I went on a medical missions trip to Nicaragua several years ago. I am not a medic, I'm not a doctor, but there were a lot of female doctors that were going, and Nicaragua was very volatile at the time. And, you know, Marine Corps skills and, you know, martial arts skills. They were like, hey, will you come along? And I was like, yeah, sure, this would be great. But I had kind of a negative idea of the whole, what I call the misho tourism. Is it a missions trip or is it a tourism trip? You know,
Sure.
but when I went down there, it really just changed my life. Just watching
Mhm.
the doctors, you know, work with people and you know, just seeing that level of compassion and it really changed my life and changed my perspective on all of that. So I think what you're doing there is awesome, and I'm glad that real estate is giving you the opportunity to pursue that, because that not everyone could do that. So I think that's awesome.
Well, I appreciate that, brother. And I share your conflicted feelings in some way with some of these medical humanitarian things. You might know I helped start a nonprofit, actually. It's called Radiating Hope. And we help to improve access to cancer care in developing countries. And my heart on that changed when I learned that cancers that in the United States are highly preventable, highly curable. When you go to the African continent, they're a death sentence due to the lack of cancer care. In a lot of countries in Africa, cancer actually kills more people than malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV combined. And I
Hmm.
mean, these are cancers that very easily are treatable and preventable. And so you can't help but see that. And if you have the skills and the resources to be able to help in a population like that, where your dollars and your time can go so far to literally save lives, it'll kind of change your mindset on that pretty quick, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We did both coasts of Nicaragua, and it was kind of what I expected. It was the whole, you know, cities that, you know, are lots of poor people living on the streets. You know, people begging. You know, all of these things that you would think of when you'd think of a third world country. But then we went as far into the interior as we could by Land Rover, and then we got on horseback and went even further into the interior. And when I got into the real interior of Nicaragua, up in the mountains, and met the people there, it was completely different, because uh, in the cities they were trying to chase after, you know, the Western lifestyle and you know, clothing and phones and all this stuff. This was a horse culture, and these
Wow.
people. Oh, and it was life changing, and this horse culture just uh, they were so cut off from everything. They grew their food. They, you know, they were there for each other as a community. And seeing that, it was kind of like traveling back in time 200 years and seeing how people lived, you know, back in that time. And I'm sorry, my
Oh,
wife
no
is
worries.
blowing up my phone right now, so I'm going to have to edit this out.
All good.
Hi, babe.
Are you pooping?
No, I'm with Larry Dougherty on
How
a
are you?
podcast.
Pooping. Why did you let me say
Because you were blowing up my phone, and I knew you were only going to get more anxious if I didn't answer. So,
I was trying not to get anxious. I was trying to figure out, do you want to go to wing night? Like,
yeah,
where we
wing
have
night sounds
plans?
great. I love it.
Okay,
Let's do
I want to come to Wing Night. That sounds
it.
delicious. Where's Wing Night?
great. They're really good.
Yeah, it's gonna be a great podcast, and we'll save him some wings.
Okay, bye.
All right,
I'm going
bye.
to take you up on that.
Oh, it's already recorded. She said, "Please don't record that. This is definitely going in the podcast
Yeah,
now."
heck yeah.
Yeah, and that's why my brain was getting distracted, because she was blowing up my phone. But
You were talking
what
about
I
the
saw
horseback
there,
culture.
you're
Yeah.
talking about being conflicted. What I saw there was, I didn't want this materialistic Western concept of like what living is
Mm,
to penetrate into that community. It was so it was so pure and it was so good that, coming from the cities in Nicaragua and then going deep into the interior and seeing how they were living, it's like, I know they want what we have, but
Mm,
they don't really know that they don't want what we have.
yeah.
And the last day that we were there, organic, I guess is the word, just organic community. It was so beautiful. And I got to share at the local chapel, and we were installing water filtration systems. But um, the last day that we were there, they were doing a presentation of what their dreams and goals were. And their dreams and goals were to have a year round road that goes from El Cedro, which was the name of this village, all the way into Managua, and I knew why. I mean, because we evacuated the chief of the village's granddaughter. I held her for hours in a um, in a Land Rover, and just to get them in, people who needed medical care beyond what our team could do into the city. So I understood why they wanted that, and especially the mothers in the community. They want that health care, they want that access, they want it readily available. But I knew with it was going to come all of
Yeah.
these things that we were seeing in the city. I know it's a long tantrum, but
Oh, that's incredible, man. How is training for your big adventure going? Not to side rail things, but I.
yeah, it's a lot. Everyone in those villages are saying that they don't even travel between villages at that time of year. We're going to be departing Nanana January 27th, which is
Oh,
the
wow!
actual
I didn't know you
centennial
were
anniversary.
going that early. That's
Crazy.
yeah. No, it's awesome.
That's what, yeah. So, I mean, January 27th is the anniversary date. So that's when we're taking off. And,
Holy wow!
um,
You're doing a
yeah. And
real
so,
adventure. There's not like trails getting put in for you by.
no.
That's
And there have been reenactments before, but they've always been a month later or a
uh-huh.
month and a half later than the actual anniversary date to take advantage of the Iron Dog and the Iditarod trails that
Warmer
get put
weather.
in. But yeah, and longer days and warmer weather. So it's scary having a real veteran polar explorer like Eric Larson on the team. Is bringing a lot of confidence to the team. So that's pretty awesome. But yeah, we're looking forward to it. But speaking of mushing dogs, we can shift gears and talk about your adventure experience. You are a 5-time Iditarod competitor. Of the 7 summits of the world, you've climbed 4 of them, and you've been on Everest twice. But before we dive into those a little bit, I want to go way back. I know looking over the material on your bios, I found that your grandparents had a big influence on your life. So I wondered if you want to talk about those roots and the beginning and how adventure kind of took root in your heart.
Yeah, sure. My grandparents were enormously influential on my life. I grew up in a big family. I have 7 sisters. We grew up in extremely humble circumstances. I mean, my parents raised us in like a 1,200 square foot, 3-bed, 2-bath home. Both my parents worked multiple jobs growing up. I mean, it was definitely like worse than paycheck to paycheck. We survived on charity from others in many periods of my life, charity from our church. But my grandparents were in a different station in life. They actually had fairly abundant resources. And as a young kid, I saw them traveling the globe and doing incredible things. Like I remember when I was 10 years old, they went to Australia just because that was the best place to take pictures of Halley's Comet. And I can very clearly remember the picture of Halley's Comet that my grandfather sent me with a handwritten note because he knew I was fascinated by astronomy and wanted to be an astronaut someday.
Yes, of course.
And so just seeing my grandparents living life to the fullest as a kid, it just inspired me that like, man, someday that's what I want to do. And my grandparents, they were completely fascinated by Alaska. So they were frequent visitors to Alaska. Their home, even though they lived in Washington State, their entire home was decorated in native Alaskan art. So they had this hand carved wooden front door that was carved by an Inuit man. You walked into their home and there was a totem pole that they had gotten in Alaska. I mean, a full size totem pole. Yeah, they were fascinated by Alaska. And so that couldn't help but rub off on me. I never went to Alaska as a kid. In fact, the first time I came to Alaska, I was 30, 37, 38 years old, not that long
Mhm.
ago. But my grandmother, when Libby Riddles won the Iditarod back in 1986, she just thought that was the coolest thing ever. And, the saying back then was Alaska, where men are men and women win the Iditarod, right? Because
Yes.
Libby Riddles won and then Susan Butcher had that nice run. And so my grandmother became a huge fan of the Iditarod. And when I was a kid, she would send me newspaper clippings about it, keep me updated about the race. And then I started reading Jack London books. And I set a goal when I was a 10-year-old that someday I wanted to run the Iditarod. In fact, my wife, when I met her on our very first date, and I outlined what my whole life was going to look like, she was 18 years old and I was 22 or 23. And I told her that someday I was, after going to medical school and becoming a doctor, at some point in my life, I was going to move to Alaska at least for a year or two and train for and run the Iditarod. And so it's always
Mhm.
been this like goal since I was a very little kid. Many years of medical training, raising kids. We've got 5 beautiful kids. Dreams like that tend to get put on the back burner for most
Mhm.
people, and that's normal. There's a time and a season for everything, but I think for a lot of people, they're not able to ever really realize those dreams like that. And I've been fortunate that the stars kind of aligned for me in a lot of ways, and was able to make that dream become a reality. Move to Alaska, and the goal, the idea was to just run the Iditarod one time, but things kind of got out of hand, and and I've run it 5 times, like you said.
You got bit by the bug, and I have to say, I throw this joke out all the time. I always say I'm the head of my house, but my wife is the neck that turns the head.
Mm,
And after visiting your home, I see how strong of a wife and a support network that you have, and I think it's great when you can have a companion in life, that's empowering you, like I have, like you have, so that we can go after these crazy things that we do, right?
100%. I don't know if you've read the book Wild at Heart by John Eldridge. Have you read that book?
No.
He talks about how men need 3 things. They need a battle to fight, an adventure to live, and a beauty to rescue. Um,
Mm.
and man, I've been so fortunate with my companion that she has supported me, cheerleaded me, and made all of these things possible in my life.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know that you grew up with a very strong religious family with a strong religious background, as I did. Um, do you feel like that informs your perspective on creation, on adventure, on your interaction with nature, and this physical world that we live in?
Yeah, man. My I would say that my religious journey has been a very complicated one. I grew up in a very devout religion, and that was my way of living for many years. And then had actually a pretty foundational change to my religion and my spiritual beliefs later in life when I was 40 years old. But I certainly have always been amazed by the universe, by the mysteries around
Mhm.
us, by the interconnectedness, by
Mhm.
nature, by the unanswerable questions that we all face as humans on this little blue world. And absolutely, I think that that's certainly influenced my love of nature and my love of adventure for sure.
That's awesome. And similar paths. At about 35 years old, I had a faith crisis. Um, and this podcast isn't about me, so I'll save the stories for another time. But I went through what I call my Job year,
Mm-hmm.
where everything that can be shaken got shaken. And I was angry for a few years, and I was like, hey God, if this is the best you can do, get out of the driver's seat. I'm going to drive this thing for a while.
Mm.
Um, and it was actually studying for my second education in science. It was actually science that brought me back to faith, remarkably, because usually people say the opposite. They say that science drew them away from faith, but just exactly what you said, seeing the intricacies of the universe, um, you know, the most intricate of watches just doesn't come near to, uh, you know, the beautiful, just uh, design, that I see in everything, and it kind of just reinforced that, if this design is so intricate, so complex, and so masterfully done, then there's got to be a designer. And
Yeah.
so it actually reinforced and rebuilt my faith, and it does when I'm out on the trail with the sled dogs, or whatever. I seek these connections with nature, and for me, that really helps me to connect. When I'm connecting with creation, I feel like I'm connecting with the creator at the same time. Is it the same with you?
Oh man, 1,000%. I think I went from a world where, honestly, I had all the answers for much of my life. I was certain about a lot of things, and like you, it sounds like kind of the carpet was ripped out from underneath me, and I went from certainty to absolute uncertainty. And initially, that was scary in an existential way that
Hmm.
I can hardly describe. I can remember when I was going through this, I can clearly remember my daughter was playing the piano in the other room, and my reality was so questions and so distorted that I literally was questioning whether the piano music I was hearing was real or not. That's how like foundational this
Hmm.
was to me. Um, but I went from a place of that uncertainty being frightening to now it's beautiful. I love the
Hmm.
uncertainty, and I've also discovered that that's what faith is. And my idea um, around God also, I think, has changed, certainly has morphed, but has
Hmm.
become more beautiful as well. And I think I appreciate uh, the time that I have, these experiences that I have, even more fully than I did with the worldview that I had before.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and I think that's beautiful. I really do. I'm going to use an analogy here before I ask you my next question. We have a mutual friend, Gerhard from South Africa, who came so close to the finish line of the Iditarod before tragedy hit his team, and he had to pull out. And so I was training with him when he was going for his second attempt on the Iditarod, and he made that happen. So I want to ask you. I was looking over your bio. What does it feel like to almost get to the peak of Everest and have to pull the plug and go back? That had to be horrible.
Man, it was a gut punch, and for me at the time, it was actually worse than that. I had created this ridiculous thing that I called Iditarest. So I was trying to become the first person to successfully complete the Iditarod and then climb Mount Everest in the same year. And I completed the Iditarod. Actually, it was probably my easiest Iditarod for whatever reason. And a few weeks later, found myself in Nepal, and my team got to the south summit of Mount Everest. So that is just 335 feet from the top. I mean, higher than K2. We're higher than K2 at that point. That's the second tallest peak in the world, and you could literally see, the summit just seemingly a stone's throw away. And feeling like I was on the verge, at least in that moment, of making history and accomplishing this long held dream of standing on top of the world, and then being told that we needed to turn around because the jet stream, which hovers above Mount Everest, was about to descend, and that hell would be unleashed upon us, that it would be hurricane force winds. And, that the tricky thing, Jonathan, in that moment was that when we were being told that information, we're less than an hour from the top, and we were in perfect conditions when we were being told to turn around. This was based on a forecast that was about to change. And so making that decision as a team to trust our Sherpa and our guides, um, it was in that moment, it was challenging, and I pushed back. I'm actually
Yeah, well,
ashamed.
I was gonna ask. I mean, because there's the movie about Everest when a similar thing happened, and the people had these goals, and so they were pushing against their Sherpas' decisions. And I was
Yep.
gonna ask you, was there any part of you that felt like no, we were so close?
I had promised, and we had promised as a team. I climbed with a group of friends. We climbed all over the world together, and we were committed that if conditions were like that and we were told to turn around, we were absolutely going to do it without question. But in that moment, my ethos on it changed a little bit because we were so close, and the conditions were perfect. And no, I argued with our Sherpa. I was that guy. But we did turn around, fortunately, because one of my best friends, he turned around first, and he's like, Larry, we need to listen. And he just started rappelling off the South Summit. And so I followed my buddy Brandon because I trusted him. And wouldn't you know it, I mean, less than an hour later, as we were still on that knife ridge between Nepal and China, the jet stream did descend. And we were very fortunate to get down. But if we would have been at the top, there's no question in my mind that I would still be on Mount Everest.
Yeah,
And so, you know, the mixed bag of emotions with that, the disappointment of not summiting, but also the enormous gratitude to still be alive. It was
yeah.
actually the next day. There was a big story that broke. Now, worldwide headlines were American doctor dies on Mount Everest. This was the day after my
No
descended.
kidding.
Yeah. And so my family, others at home were seeing these headlines. Many of my patients at my clinic were wondering if it was me because they were kind of following along. And so it was surreal, to get down and see that headline, realize it very nearly was me, could have
Yeah,
been me. Um, and I also realized, when I went back 5 years later and I did stand on the top, I was expecting that moment was going to change my life, and that, I don't know, I was going to have this transformational experience.
yeah,
But I realized that I'd already climbed Mount Everest 5 years before. Those last 200 feet, they were nothing but, it really was for my ego. A friend of mine likes to say, because I've turned around on a lot of mountains, and when you come home from a big expedition, and you don't polish off the last few hundred feet, um, people that aren't real familiar with these types of adventures have a way of kind of um, consolidating your entire experience into yes or no, did you summit? And if you didn't,
yeah.
it's like it was a failure of a trip. And if you did,
Yes or no, did you finish the Iditarod? And it's like, do you realize what's involved in running this race? It's the same,
exactly,
right?
exactly. So my buddy, my first time that I did Everest, he said to me, he's like, Larry, the journey is for the soul, the summit is for the ego.
Mm,
And I didn't really realize how profound that was until I did summit. And I realized that it really was just, just for the ego.
yeah, yeah. I remember the short I say short now because of what we're about to do. The short expedition I did a few years ago, just 7 days solo, coming out and coming back into civilization and seeing the lights of the town where I was finishing, and thinking, can I turn the dog team around and go back into the woods? Because it was about the journey, and I didn't even realize it was about the journey until I got to the finish, and I was like, no, having that opportunity to be 100% present in the
Mm,
moment where you're at, doing what you're doing, rather than worried about, all of the, we have an election, that's coming
yep.
up tomorrow, instead of worried about all the things that are going on in your family, in the world, at your work, and just being completely present. It's such a beautiful thing. And it's kind of hard to finish in that regard.
Yeah, man. I think it can be really easy to miss the main purpose of an adventure like that if you're just focused on the end outcome. So unfortunately, I've had to learn that the hard way, but it's so true.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, I'm really worried, because a centennial expedition only comes around once 100 years, and as the president of the Seppala Breed Club and having bred these dogs for 25 years, this is a one-shot deal. I can't go back in 2026 and do this centennial Seppala expedition. This is it, and so. But I mean, you've run the Iditarod 5 times. What those trails can be like in March, and so it's I you know I'm going to do what's best for the team and for the dogs, obviously, but it's going to be really hard if we get 200 or 300 miles or 400 or 500 miles into this and have to pull the plug. I'll be calling you for some encouragement.
Yeah, I think I think the truth is these adventures. It's a lot less about reaching the finish line or reaching the summit than it is how the adventure changes you along the way. And I think that's
Mhm.
what took me a long time to realize. You've already won, Jonathan, by conceiving of this crazy thing. I think you're the only human being honoring the centennial in this way, and all on your own, training a group of Siberians to get to the finish line. That in and of itself is tenacious and amazing. And whether or not, I mean, certainly I'm rooting for you, and I hope you make it all the way to Nome. But whether or not you do, I don't know if that's going to change you as much as just conceiving of it, training for it, and getting to the starting line.
I appreciate you saying that, and hopefully you won't have to tell me that again come March of next
Yeah.
year. And talking about almost finishing, just for a little while, I want to talk about your son, because your mushing passion and Iditarod fever was contracted by your son, and your son has become an exceptional musher in his own right, working out of CV Kennels with the legend Mitch CV, and he almost finished the Iditarod last year, and tragedy befell his team. And do you want to talk about that, or share any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So we moved to Alaska in 2014. Calvin turned 12 here in Alaska shortly after we moved here, and I mean within 2 weeks of moving to Alaska, fortunately I was able to find a relationship with a local kennel with Jim Lanier. I don't know if you know Jim, Northern
Hmm.
Whites. That's where my roots in mushing come, in Alaska. And Jim invited me into his kennel. I helped him train for the Iditarod, and in exchange, he let me train his dog team and use his dogs for my own qualifying races for the Iditarod. But Calvin was a big part of that. As a 12-year-old, he was on the back of the ATV and went with me on multiple mushing adventures. I was so focused on myself and my own dream and my own mission of doing the Iditarod that I didn't really realize that this was rubbing off on my own son, and the parallels of me being a 10-year-old and inspired by my grandparents. I don't think I really recognized that the opportunity that this was to rub off on my own son, because I was so focused on myself, I'm ashamed to say, but it did. The Calvin, when he was in high school, he did the junior Iditarod, also with Jim Lanier's team, so following in my footsteps. And then he was offered an opportunity to help Mitch out on his summer tour operation on the glacier. So taking basically cruise passengers on a glacier ride in the middle of the summer. And that led to Calvin. Oh, hang on, my battery's unplugged. I don't want to die here. Give me 1 second. That would be bad. Let me plug this back in. Sorry.
No, take your time.
Okay, there we go. Um, so yeah, Calvin had this opportunity to help with the summer operation. That kind of reignited his mushing passion, and he was invited to come and help Mitch in the wintertime. And that was also the same path that I had followed. I used Mitch's resources and kennel for my own Iditarod journey, my rookie run. And Calvin was able to complete his qualifiers with Mitch Seavey, which was amazing.
Mhm.
And then fortunately he was in the right place, right time, and was offered the opportunity to run the Iditarod. So I mean, the whole thing was just kind of surreal and amazing and incredible as a father to watch this whole thing unfold. And I, of course, was extremely excited. But yeah, he had really a flawless run from Willow all the way to Shaktoolik. He was running on a puppy schedule. So
Mhm.
for kind of armchair mushing fans or those that aren't super familiar, I mean, he was running a very conservative race, not
Mhm.
even really racing, just kind of
Right.
the goal was to make it to Nome and for
Mhm.
him to have a great experience, for the dogs to be happy and have a great experience. This was a very well rested team.
Mhm.
And not at all redlining this team or pushing the
Right.
envelope. But
Right.
he got to Shaktoolik, which is, I don't know what, 100, 120 miles from Nome, something like that, maybe 150. But yeah, pretty darn close. It's kind of like getting to the south summit of Mount
Mhm.
Everest. And he left Shaktoolik and unfortunately had tragedy strike. And one of his favorite dogs, a little 3-year-old named Henry, just suddenly collapsed and died.
Mhm.
And Calvin you tried to revive the dog with the help of someone else, Laura Kittleson was
Mhm.
also with him, and those two worked on that dog and did all they could. And I can't imagine the heartbreak of having to load one of your teammates into your
Oh, yeah.
sled, turn around back to Shaktoolik, and that's where his race ended.
Yeah, and I know how tough it was for him for a few reasons. Number one, we're friends, and we stayed in touch regularly until that happened, and then for about 6 months he was just radio silent, and
Mm-hmm.
we picked up our communication again since then. But and when he finally reached back out to me, he just made it very clear that he was shaken,
Oh
that
yeah,
it had really shaken him. And um, you know I hate to get clinical about it just for a minute, but for our listeners who may be concerned that the Iditarod is unkind to dogs, if you take an average year of 50 teams times 14 to 16 dogs per team, and you stretch that number of dogs over 14 to 18 days. That number of dogs, more dogs would die sitting on a couch in a pet home than that number of dogs running this. And they're far healthier than these athletes are far healthier than your average pet, well, than any pet really. And they're better cared for. So it's just when you have that many dogs running a race, just the law of averages. There's going to be, there's just as there would be at home, just as there would be with the lab sitting on the couch. There are going to be these times when things like this happen. And as a musher, though, that doesn't make it any easier, though, right? For the musher.
yeah, yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, somehow we accept the level of risk even in like high school sports. I mean, high school athletes die not infrequently, not frequently, but probably with comparable odds, and certainly with any sort of adventure or risky sport, that's a risk. I mean, I've lost friends in the mountains. My Sherpa that turned us around on the South Summit and saved our lives, unfortunately died the next year on Mount
Mhm.
Everest, and he died assisting in a rescue at Camp 2 on Mount Everest. And unfortunately, that's an inherent part of of any activity that is worthwhile to pursue from an adventure
Yeah.
standpoint, whether it's flying an airplane or climbing a mountain or playing a sport. But these dogs, those who are immersed in this activity, understand that just like I love climbing and this is what these dogs are born to do, and they love it,
Yes.
and they are part of the team, and they're dying to get out there and do this adventure together. So yeah, it's a very, very unfortunate tragedy, but also an unfortunate reality of pursuing what I would say most any adventure that's worth doing comes with some risk on the flip side.
Mhm. Well, I was certainly excited to see that he made the decision to get back in the saddle. I think he would have regretted it had he not. I also know that he's young, and he was, he has plans. He needs to, build a life and all these things. So this is another year of, completely dedicating himself to the world of dogs, and I know that that was a big decision for him too. But I think definitely he's made the right decision to get back in the saddle and make a go of this again. And I want to encourage anybody who's listening to this. It's not Calvin and Hobbes. It's Calvin and Dogs, and that's Calvin and Dogs is his website and his social media. So go check him out. And there are a lot of ways that you can support him and help him finish this Iditarod dream.
Yeah.
You said something earlier in this conversation, and starting to wind this up for you because I know you got places to be. But you were talking about the book that you had read and the three things that a man needs. What is it? Because not all men have this. I mean, you know a lot of men. I know a lot of men and women. I don't want to. This isn't a sexist thing, but there are a lot of men and women who are content
Mm.
to get up at 8 a.m., come home at 6 p.m., have dinner, watch TV, go to bed, and do that over and over and over again. And oh, now I'm 80 years old and I'm, being put
Hmm.
in a coffin. And there are people who are completely happy to live their life like that. So, and I know you can't speak for everyone, but I want you to speak for yourself. What is it that drives you to say, why can't you be content? Just to, to go to the movies and eat dinner and watch TV, and or like, why can't you be content? What is it that drives you?
Yeah. Sometimes I wish I could be content, and I sometimes I wish I could be quote unquote what society would consider to be normal. And I think you're right. There are some people that are content with a life like that, but I think there's a
I
lot of
think most people are.
well, I I don't know about that. I wonder. I mean, we have a huge mental health crisis in this country, and I think that part of it is there's a discontentment within people that they don't even know why they're discontent.
Hmm.
And I think that life is not designed to just be comfortable. The dream life of maybe being on the beach and flipping a burger and hearing that sizzle and taking a sip of your beer and saying, this is the good life. It, is that a good life? Is that a life well lived? I think there's a difference there. A life well lived, I think, comes with some scars, comes with some stories, comes with some risk, comes with some adventure. And I think that inside the DNA of every man is that craving for exploration, for risk, but that requires you to step into the unknown, to step into some uncertainty. And these activities that we sometimes do, like mushing, like what you're about to do, 99% of what you are about to do and are doing is miserable. you know these frigid temperatures, the work involved, just bending over, and the back pain involved of booting every single dog at our age, like there is a lot of misery there. But that 1% that is so awesome that most people, I mean, I can remember when I first moved to Alaska, Jonathan, and I'd never seen the Northern Lights, never even been to Alaska. And I was out on the Denali Highway in the middle of the night by dog team, and the most beautiful display of Northern Lights came out. And you're all by yourself, just hearing the pattering of each of those feet of your dogs. I mean, talk about just like, I could die right now.
Yeah.
This is incredible. Just
Yes.
something so unique, so special.
Yeah.
Um, I think that I really do believe that it's a core need. I don't know of all human beings. I know within me, and I do believe within most men, that there is that need for adventure and need for risk.
Yeah, and that's why you don't know this about me, but I grew up a piano playing, silk shirt wearing, poetry writing. I didn't play sports in high school. I sang in the choir, and that's who. And I realized, like, as I was reaching my junior and senior year, that like there was like something inside of me that says, no, I've got to push myself. I've got to challenge myself. There
Mm.
has to be something. And the moment I turned 18, I joined the Marine Corps. You know, it's the hardest branch, so that's the one I'm going to join. You know, and you know, because there was just this drive inside of me that, you know, I knew that for some reason I needed to push myself and see how far I could be pushed. And I agree with you. I think it is hardwired.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think in our society there's a lot of negative messaging about men or to men, and I think men are confused about who they are, who they're supposed to be,
Mhm.
and I think something about getting into the outdoors and pushing yourself in a physical way, it kind of helps find some of those answers and fix those things.
It's excellent and a great way to wrap this up. But I want to ask you last question: what's next? What's next for Larry? What do you got? What do you got going on?
You know, I am still working on my goal of the seven summits. That's the highest mountain on each continent. So the big
Yes.
adventure that I'm preparing for is in January. I guess when you're out on your frigid adventure, I'll be on one of my own in Antarctica. So I'll be climbing the highest mountain in Antarctica, which is Mount Vinson. That's what I'm prepping for.
Awesome. Awesome. And how can we follow you?
Oh man, I haven't even thought about that honestly, but I'm sure I'll do social media updates. So anybody that wants to follow along, just find me on Facebook or Instagram.
Yeah, you've got some ways. Social media, actually, they can look up your name, but also, you know, I'll include in the notes for this program your charity, your cancer charity. So please get those over to me, and we'll make sure that we direct whoever's listening to this to your work.
Awesome. Really appreciate it, Jonathan. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We got to do it more often.
Yeah, man. Well,
All right.
hopefully, you know, when will you finish your adventure?
If you want to make God laugh, you tell him your plans. So so on paper we're pulling into Nome February 14th on Valentine's Day.
On Valentine's Day. I just want to look real quick where. Oh, dude. Yeah. So I happen to have that week off. So
You got to
I'll
come.
be, yeah, I'll be following along, and I'd love to come greet you in Nome.
We've got sponsors that are planning on flying up, and you know, we're gonna help book the hotels before the Iditarod for Nome. So there's going to be some people up there, and we'd love to have. Man, I'd love to have you. It'd be great to see you there.